Okay. Well, I want to welcome everyone tonight. We are doing a brand new presentation. We've never done this before, and it was Kim's suggestion. I think it was a fantastic suggestion. In fact, I'm going to turn over a whole bunch of the class to Kim, but we're going to be talking about black bear management. And there's a couple of different aspects to black bear management we want to touch on. And so I'm gonna begin. I'm gonna talk a little bit of basics about how state and federal agencies manage populations. But then I'm going to turn it over to Kim to teach you how we kind of manage some of these individual situations that occur with bears. And obviously, bears are a high profile species, and the public really gets involved when it comes to managing these individual animals. And so, to get started here, what I want to do, obviously, Kim and I both have quite a bit of experience. I am Daryl Radijak, I'm a wildlife biologist. I started out my career as the manager of the Appalachian Bear Center, which is now the Appalachian Bear Rescue. From that point, I moved on and took a position with the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency, and I was the big game program coordinator. And what that meant was I was managing the deer populations, the deer and the elk populations in the state of Tennessee. And so that's where I'm going to draw a lot of my information from, was my experiences managing the bear population in the state of Tennessee. After I was in that position, I was promoted to chief of wildlife. So I was over all wildlife in the state for about 5 more years after that, working on different groups regionally. So throughout, it wasn't just the state of Tennessee; it was throughout the whole southeast. Now I live out west. I deal with a lot of the western species. And so all told, I've got about over 20 years experience working with big game animals and especially bears. So bears are my specialty, they're my passion. So with that, Kim, if you want to just mention a little bit about your experience and background.
Oh, I won't say very much there. It's kind of there on the screen for itself and everything too. But of course, the last 8 years I've been working for the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation after I retired from Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And really, what I do now primarily is working on elk restoration throughout the eastern U.S. We've got elk in Virginia, West Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Missouri, Kentucky. Just Kentucky alone has over 12,000 elk too. So that's kind of where I spend part of my time now. And yep, got the 2 books out too. We have 3 more books coming out sometime whenever we can get time to work on them. But I've had a really good career and I've been pretty blessed.
All right. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to I'm going to kick things off and just give you a little bit of background information about how we manage bears, and I'm going to do it from that population level because that was a big part of my job when I worked in Tennessee. But to start things off, again, we're joining in from all over North America. So where do you find black bears? And so if you look at the entire map of North America, this is where you would find black bears if you had landed in North America sometime before Christopher Columbus. You can see black bears have a huge, huge range. They pretty much were found throughout the entire continent, North American continent. And the one thing is, people and bears don't often mix. You can live with bears no problem, but oftentimes people and bears don't get along too well. And especially in the earlier parts of the history of our nation, you had bears competing for the same food resources and the habitat that the early settlers were competing for. And so what happened is we pretty much cleared them out wherever we were going to live. And so this is fairly close to the current black bear distribution. It's not perfect. This map's a little old. But the good thing is black bear populations since about the mid 1900s, well, actually it hasn't even been that long. For the last, say, 30 years or so, black bear populations, especially in the east, have really been taking off. And so Tennessee, all these states on the east coast where you see the Appalachian mountain chain, that's where the bears pretty much found a safe haven from the onslaught from the early settlers. And so that's where they resided. They got high up in the mountains, they lived there. And oftentimes people get confused thinking, oh, bears live in these mountains. They need high elevation and all these these places far, far away from people. And that's not the case, because we have extremely good bear populations in Florida, which the highest point in the entire state of Florida, I think, is 800 feet. And so they could live in the lowlands, they could live in the highlands, they could live away from people, they can live amidst people. And that's usually where we get a lot of our bear management that we have to do, is when bears and people live together. And I'll let Kim cover all of that. But the good news, I think everyone should understand that black bear populations are doing fantastic. It's estimated anywhere 600 to 800,000 black bears in North America, which is a really, really strong bear population. And the good news, like I said, in the East Coast, almost every state, not every single state, but almost every state is seeing their black bear populations grow, and actually grow quite a bit in some areas. And so black bears in general are doing really, really good. So what I want to do is just explain to you, how do we know this? How do we know the bear populations are doing good? And you have to understand, state and federal agencies, they're often tasked with managing these bears. And when I say managing, it literally means making sure we have these animals around for everybody to enjoy. And so just maintaining proper populations, or large enough populations that the species itself is doing really good. And so oftentimes we are tasked, and this was part of my job when I was working in Tennessee, we're tasked with tracking their populations to make sure they're not declining. That's the most important thing. So we got to make sure they're not declining, and hopefully they're either increasing or staying the same at the very least. And so how would we go about doing that? Well, you've probably seen this picture before, because sometimes I use it in my bio for some of these other classes. That is actually a picture of me when I was working for the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency, and I was hanging, if you could see in the top right corner, there's a couple of sardine cans. And what I was doing there was working on this bait station survey that we would do. Now, this survey was specifically designed for black bears. And what it does, it gives us some information about the bear population. And so there's a couple of things you've got to follow when you're doing this type of survey method. There's rules you got to follow. And so, for example, some of the things that you want to make sure you do, we try to stick to the same transects or the same areas year in and year out. And what I mean by a transect is, we'll be assigned as a biologist or a wildlife officer or a technician. Doesn't have to be with the State Wildlife Agency. Kim Delosier and his guys used to do this inside Great Smoky Mountain National Park. In fact, I helped Kim with a couple of them for a few different years. And so they would give you a transect, and think of a transect as kind of like a hiking trail. And so you would get a trail that might be 2 miles long, it might be 15 miles long. But it's quite a bit of distance, and it usually, it's intended to go through black bear habitat. And what we do is we would walk these trails, and every half a mile we would hang a bait station. And a bait station consists of those sardine cans. And so what we do in order to know that we're going a half a mile. Now understand, we started doing these things many decades ago, before we had these really fancy GPSs. So we would know pretty much how fast we walk, how many miles could we walk within an hour. And so we would be able to time ourselves, and we would go for that walk. Say it would take 8 minutes to walk a half a mile, or whatever your pace was. Each individual is different. And so we'd walk that 8 minutes, we'd stop, we'd hang a bait station, try to get coordinates if we had the equipment to get the coordinates, and we would leave that bait station there. Now, understand there's a certain way that you would hang these sardine cans, because what we wanted to lure in bears to visit these bait stations. And so we would hang it in a manner that would make it easy for us to determine whether or not a bear had visited it. Now, if you just took that can and just kind of like, say you nailed it up to the tree, you could have a raccoon, skunk, all sorts of animals getting into that bait station and eating all that food. And so there's a specific way you want to hang it where you want to get it away from the base, from the bowl or the base of that tree. So, like I said, an animal like a raccoon can't climb up and get it. But there's other things that we would look for. You'd want to hang it on a very smooth barked tree if you could find one, like a beech tree. If you know what a beech tree looks like, it has a very smooth bark. Because if a bear were to climb that tree to get at the bait station, it's going to leave claw marks. It's going to leave sign that it was visited by a bear. Another trick that some of the biologists used was to hang it in a much smaller diameter tree that a bear could actually like literally break the tree down. I've seen that a couple of times. In fact, I've got videos of a bear doing that. And so the whole purpose there is to design this bait station so we could tell whether or not it was visited by a bear. And so what we would do is we would go on this hike. We would hang all these bait stations throughout really good bear habitat along these trails or these transects. And then we'd let them go for a while, 3 to 5 days. We let them sit out there for a while because we wanted to make sure if a bear was in the area, there's a really strong likelihood that it's going to smell it, be attracted to it, going to come by, visit, and try getting the sardines out of that can. And so what would happen is we wait that time, we go back, and it was really simple data collection. It was literally, the question was this site visited by a bear? Yes or no? And so what that would do is, hopefully, well, it didn't come out as I wanted it to. What we're able to do, though, is if you were to plot that information, say each one of these bars represents a year. And so the very first year we did it, you look at that and say about maybe 12% of all your bait stations were visited. And keep in mind, when we were doing this in Tennessee, I think we had close to 500 bait stations scattered throughout the Smoky Mountains. And that was separate from Kim. Kim had a whole bunch scattered out through the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. But we would have hundreds and hundreds of bait sites. And so say the first year you did it, you had about 12% of all the sites were visited by a bear. Then you do it again, and it goes up a little. And you start recording all this information year after year after year. And you plot that on a graph. And so what that gives us, it gives us this really nice looking graph. And if you put a trend line on there as far as the percentage of bait sites that have been visited by a bear, what you're going to do is you're going to end up with this trend line. Now, if you look at that and you know this is representative of the bear population, what you can tell with pretty good confidence, since you know year after year after year, the number of bait stations getting visited by a bear is going up, it's a really good index or indice that tells you the bear population is probably increasing. Now, there's one problem with this, and we have done this. This is what many states, especially in the southeast, this is how we kind of kept tabs on the bear population, is we do these bait station surveys. And it was really good information to tell us the bear population is increasing. Now, you get to a point when there's so many bears that this survey is really not being informative because there's bears all over the place. So this is really good where bears have not existed for a long time, and which was mostly the East Coast. But suddenly this doesn't become as informative as we need it to be. But this was great. Southeastern states used this literally for decades. For about 30 years, this is how we kind of kept track of the bear populations. But there's one problem with this. It tells us that, yes, there's a strong likelihood that the bear population is increasing, but what doesn't it tell us? Anyone got a guess? Like I said, it's really informative to tell us the population's going up, but there's something that's really important that we would love to know, but this type of survey doesn't tell us. Nobody? All right. Well, I will give it to you. The problem with this type of survey is it doesn't tell us how many bears are there. And so you could have, for example, if you had a bait station, you could have one bear come in and take that those sardines, or you could have 10 different bears come in and take those sardines. And so it really doesn't do a really good job of telling us how many bears we have. And that's really, really important when you're trying to manage an animal, is knowing how many of those animals are in your population. And so I'm going to teach you something. Does everyone understand that? Yes, no? Anyone out there? Okay. Now this is where I'm going to shift gears a little bit, because like I said, this type of survey served us really, really well for decades. But over the last 10 years or so, we had to come up with a new way for us to kind of work with these bear populations. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch gears. We're not going to talk about bears for a second, but you'll see where this ties in. We're going to talk about a squirrel, because we had to figure out a way to figure out how many animals we had. So let's pretend everyone lives somewhere, or hopefully you live somewhere where you have squirrels around. So say you owned 100 acres and you wanted to find out how many squirrels you had on your property. What is a way that you could count, or you could estimate how many squirrels you had? And so what we're going to do is we're going to set traps to try to catch all of the squirrels on our property. And when we do that, whenever we catch a squirrel, say we're actually doing this study, we put out a trap, they get into the trap, and as soon as we trap a squirrel, we're going to paint it orange. We want to mark it. We will either put an ear tag in it, but just for visual purposes, we're going to paint this squirrel orange. Just so you know, we didn't do this. So we are going to try to catch every single squirrel on our property, and we keep putting traps out all over the place, trying to catch every squirrel. So the first time we go out there, we set all these traps and we catch 20 squirrels, and every squirrel we catch, we paint orange. And now after we mark them all, we release them all, and we let them all go back and mingle about in their habitat. So we caught them all, we marked them, and we released them. And we let them go for a little bit. We don't want to let them go too long, but we let them go for a little bit so they can get acclimated or back into their habitat. So we wait a few weeks, and then we're going to go back and we're going to try to catch all the squirrels again. And so this time, when we go through there, now this is one example. Say we go through and we try to catch all the squirrels again, and we catch pretty much the same amount of squirrels, and almost all of them are orange, except there's two that we apparently caught that weren't marked in the first place. Looking at this, we know that first time around, we caught most of the squirrels that we had on our property, because the second time around, we caught them all again. And so that tells us that we got most of the squirrels on that property. But here's an example. Say we went back there and we tried catching all the squirrels on our property again, and we caught them all again, but this time we only caught two that were painted orange, and all these other ones that we caught, we didn't catch before. They're brand new squirrels. Right away you're thinking, wow, I got a whole bunch more squirrels on my property than I thought I did, because I only caught two of them that were marked. This is one of the most basic ways that biologists can determine populations. I'm not going to get into the technical stuff. It's called the Lincoln-Peterson Index. But literally what it is, it's a simple ratio. Believe it or not, even in biology, you've got to do math, and it gets way more complicated than this. But if you look, the top right corner says the number marked in your first sample. So if you go out there and you catch 20 squirrels, then the second time around, you catch a whole bunch of squirrels. You got to record how many you caught in that second effort and how many of those were marked. It literally creates a simple ratio, and that is what you can use, or what a formula you could use to calculate the size of the whole population. N is what you're looking for. And so I'm hoping this squirrel example kind of gives you an idea of how we can, it's called capture recapture or mark recapture. And it's a way for us to determine how many animals are out there. Remember the bait station index, it didn't tell us how many. It told us the population was increasing, but it didn't tell us how many. And so using this simple example of squirrels, it's going to take us to kind of what most states are doing now with bears. And so if you've ever heard of this or seen this, this is a picture of someone doing a bear bait station. It's a DNA bait station. And if you see, he's got something in there that liquid he's pouring out is some type of aromatic lure that's going to draw bears into this. And do you see that wire that's going all around him? That's a simple barbed wire. Now there's different designs. We like to use multiple wires because what it's meant to do is when a bear comes to visit this bait station, he's going to have to go over or under or through this barbed wire. And when he does that, guess what's going to happen? He's going to get snagged on it and it's going to pull out his hair. And so once we pull out his hair, because of technology nowadays, we can look at the DNA and we can identify individual bears. And so because we can identify, those bears are marked. We know which ones were captured and which ones weren't captured. So what many states do nowadays, Tennessee, New Mexico, just all over the country, we do these bear DNA studies to give us an idea of how many bears we have out there. Because what we'll do is we'll set this bait station, but now we do it with barbed wire to pull DNA. And so when a bear visits it, we mark it, we pull his hair, we can identify him. Then we'll pull that site down, we won't bait it. We'll wait a couple of weeks, and then we'll go in there again and rebait it. This is our second capture. And we'll see what bears come back to visit. And so using that ratio that we did with the squirrels, we can actually calculate pretty much what a bear population is in an area. Now, I have oversimplified this like incredibly. There's a lot more math and statistics, and there's a much more rigorous type of survey you've got to do. But this is pretty much the method that we use nowadays to calculate how many bears we have in an area. And so I think it's a wonderful thing. A lot of people think wildlife biology, ooh, you go out, look, and count animals. There's, believe it or not, hardcore science behind all of this. And that's one of the ways that helped me manage bear populations when I was working back in Tennessee. But this is how many states do it now to calculate bear populations. So with that, my section's over. So does anyone have any questions about bear populations, how we tracked them, and how we were able to do this? Nobody? Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Kim.
Okay, thanks, Daryl. I appreciate
Trish
that
did
too.
ask one question. So when you take surveys, does it matter what time of year? You want to hit them in a tight window. We usually do it in the summertime when the bears are most active. Obviously, we're not going to be setting bait stations for bears during the wintertime when they're sleeping. But in the summertime, they're out there rambling around looking for food. So the key here is to kind of have a short window. You want to capture all the bears or pull hair from all the bears, collect all that information, let it go for a few weeks because you don't want bears leaving an area or anything. You want to go back within a few weeks and then try to recapture them. So it's not so much the time of the year, other than they're active and out and about. But the window of opportunity, you want to make sure you time it right, so you don't have bears. For example, this is probably a better way to explain it. You don't want to put it out in the fall, and for the first capture all the bears that are gorging themselves, and then wait too long that some of the bears went into den. And so you just want to make sure all the bears are out and about and active and not disappearing on you. So. And as far as counting bears of all ages, when we pull a hair, we're going to be counting all the bears of all age. We could identify each one individually, but the bad thing is with a hair DNA sample, it doesn't tell us the age of that animal. We can tell the age of the animal by pulling a tooth. I think most of you know that with bears being a hibernating animal, they lay down layers of cementum on their teeth. Or what you could do is you could pull a small tooth that the bears don't use. You send it off to a lab, they cross section it and make a really thin slice, and then they look at it under a microscope and it looks like tree rings when you cut a tree in half. Because remember, just like a tree that has the growing period in the spring and the summer, and a dormant period in the winter, bears do the same thing. So their teeth have these rings on them, and you could age a bear by looking at its tooth. So, okay, I believe I'm done. If you don't, we could always come back to more population questions if you want. But I'm going to turn it over to Kim. Kim was the expert when it comes to handling individual bears and dealing with um, what do you do when you have an issue or a situation with the public, and how do you deal with that? Because this is truly one of the biggest parts of bear management when it comes to state and federal agencies, is dealing with these individual animals. And so, Kim, I will turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Darrell. I appreciate that. One thing I might mention about the base station surveys that was conducted in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, the timing, at least what we did it primarily during the month of July, because that's when your breeding season normally occurs. That's when your breeding age females will be in their home territory. So you have a good distribution of where these animals are in their home territory. So typically July was the month that we did that as well. So we're going to kind of I remember buying sardines. I purchased probably 14 or 1500 cans of sardines each year too for that. So we had about around 400 bait station sites in the park, and so it's good and bad. It's very sensitive. Let's say it's not very sensitive if there's extremely high population or low population. It's more sensitive through the middle portion, I guess, of densities. But anyway, it was something we did for a long time too, and it's good to know if your bear population is starting to crash. It's a good thing to do to try to confirm that. Anyway, I'm going to switch gears now, go into individual animals, which is really what a lot of people, the general public, want us to do, is to manage individual animals. And that's kind of what we did in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And so I've got a lot of information in my head over the years of what we did. And basically, what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to tell you what went through my head when we had a bear incident on what we should do, what management action we should take into account to deal with that bear. Some bears we may not do anything, and then other situations we may have to recommend putting that bear down or euthanize it. So I'm going to let you kind of play the bear manager tonight on a few scenarios, and you give me your thoughts on what you would do if we had a certain bear incident in the park or anywhere. So anyway, we're going to talk real quickly about bear behaviors. We've talked about this before, but just real simply, there's wild bear behaviors, which is very desirable. Bear smells you, sees you, it runs away. Habituated behavior is a behavior where a animal feeds naturally near developed areas. So it'll feed naturally near trails, near picnic areas, campgrounds, whatever it might be. But it's basically eating wild foods, but it is very close proximity to developed areas. So that's the animals you'll see. Oh, in Denali National Park, bears and wolves and things like that, they feel very comfortable to be near a developed area because there's no harm or necessarily no risk to them at that time. Of course, we know that when you get people and animals together, eventually someone's going to throw food to them. The next is food condition behaviors, where these animals are hooked on our food or garbage and they're approaching us or our homes or our developed areas looking for food. So that's another serious behavior. Tolerant behavior, I threw that in just to kind of let people know that a lot of these animals do not want other animals close to them. Bears really, for the most part, tend to be more solitary, except in family groups. And they don't necessarily like other animals to be close to them, too. However, during the fall of the year, where there's high quality food, white oak acorns or berries or whatever it might be, these animals will tolerate the presence of other animals close to them to be able to take advantage of that high quality food source. So they will tolerate people as well too. You may be stressing these animals out by getting close to them, but if there's a really high quality food source there, they may tolerate you. Not that they necessarily like you or like you to be close to them, but they will tolerate you to be able to take advantage of that food source. And the last is predatory behavior. We may have talked about that in the past in some of the webinars, but predatory behavior is pretty self-explanatory. It's where a bear actually goes after a person, with the intent of actually that person is basically food. So it's prey in their eyes. So we're going to just kind of go over some really quick behaviors for people to know. So really our objective in managing bears, of course, last year the park, Great Smoky Mountains National Park, had over 11 million visitors. It's about the same number of visitors as the next 3 national parks combined. So a lot of people are there. There's a lot of bears there, 1,600, 2 bears per square mile. And obviously they bring in the people bring in a lot of garbage. So the chances of bear encounters are fairly high there in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. So really, how do we deal with that? And I tell people that, do bears wake up one day and say, hey, I think I'll be a food conditioned bear today, or I think I'll go downtown, or I'll go to a picnic area and roam around, check things out and see if there's any food there. And that's really not necessarily true. Mothers that have wild behaviors, they train their cubs to be wild cubs and have wild behaviors. So if a mother's out there too, and she has her cubs with her, and she smells some person, she'll run off, and those cubs will follow, and they will learn. However, if that mother is food conditioned, and she's hooked on our food or our garbage too, she'll do the same thing. She will train her cubs to be garbage cubs too, and to approach people and to approach developed areas to looking for food and garbage too. So it's both good and bad. If it's wild behavior, great. That mother's going to do the same thing. If it's food conditioned behavior, then she's probably going to take them down the wrong road. Now, here's some questions we're going to address here over the next few minutes or so. When should we ignore a bear's behavior? We'll talk about that. When should we relocate a bear? And if we do relocate one to a new area from the capture site, how far do we do that? When do we use aversive conditioning? Now, aversive conditioning, just the definition is really its use of an unpleasant task to be able to stop an unwanted behavior. So it's using something that's unpleasant, and not necessarily that's harmful or hurtful to it, but it's something that's unpleasant. And I use the description of, or the example of, how many people love to go to the dentist? Not many people is going to say, oh, I love to go to the dentist. But is it good for you? Well, absolutely is it good for you. And so that's kind of what aversive conditioning is too. It's an unpleasant behavior, unpleasant happening that's going to stop an unwanted behavior too. Another question here is, when do we, and this is kind of a very hot topic, what conditions exist out there when it warrants to euthanize a bear, to actually put a bear down? And I can tell you a lot of people think there are no situations where a bear should be put down, but we know that's not necessarily the case, especially when that animal has hurt someone or killed someone. Obviously, that type of behavior cannot be tolerated too. And one thing I want to address is, can we reverse a bear's behavior, if it's bad behavior? So if a bear has bad behavior, can we do something to change that bear's behavior back to where it's a wild animal? We'll address that. And can we rehab wild bears and release those animals back to the wild? We'll talk about that too. Let me tell you real quickly here how bears lose their fear of people or humans. How do bears do that? I don't think bears wake up one day and say, I think I'm not going to be afraid of people today, so I'm going to go down and see if I can get me some hamburgers or hot dogs or Kentucky Fried Chicken, at a campground. I don't think that's the case at all. Remember, the mothers, if they have wild behavior, they've trained their cubs to try to do the same thing. Well, these cubs grow up and they become yearlings. And in about a year and a half, the mother will wean those cubs. So she kicks them out. And she gets those out, and they're on their own. And I tell people it's kind of like teenagers that you take to college or somewhere and drop them off, for them to start their education. Do they always make the right decision? The answer is no, they do not. Sometimes they make very, very bad decisions too. Yearling bears, recently weaned yearling bears are the same way. So let's say, for example, mom has kicked them out. They're weaned, they're lonely, they're hungry, and uh, and they know what mom told her, but they happen to go by a picnic area, where they can smell hamburgers, hot dogs, chicken, barbecue, the whole thing. They can smell that. But they remember what mom said. Mom said, "Do not go down there because it's dangerous for you. It's very, very risky." But guess what? Mom's not here. So they start thinking about that. And at nighttime, there's security and darkness. So at nighttime, a lot of these yearlings or other bears will go down into that picnic area at nighttime because there's no people there. But there's the lingering smells of people in the area, along with the good smells of food. So they go down in there and they start finding some scraps at nighttime when no one's there. And pretty soon they become desensitized to the smell of people because mom told me this was bad. But from their eyes, nothing bad has happened at all because they've got food to eat. It was very easy to get to, and nothing bad happened to them. So they basically go in there at nighttime. Now, just like some people do, that they're not satisfied with the status quo, so they start wanting more and more of a good thing. So these animals start becoming active more at dusk in this picnic area. And if they continue to have more food and be able to get more rewards, they will go and actually become active in the daytime. Well, why do they do that? Well, now they're not eating scraps at nighttime. They're eating actually the meals itself. They'll progress into the situation where they will, if you leave them there long enough, they will mimic the same behaviors as the people in that picnic area. So they'll go in at breakfast time. They'll raid tables. They'll go up and sleep in the morning until lunchtime until people start cooking again. They'll go raid tables again, go up and sleep in the afternoon, and go back at dinner time and actually do the same thing again, mimicking exactly the same behaviors as the people using that picnic area. So all developed areas are not the same. Picnic areas are a low risk for a wild bear to go into initially. And this it's because there's no people there at nighttime, but there's food rewards, and lingering smells of people there too. So it's a lower risk. And what's a higher risk? Well, higher risk would be a campground where people are there active, things are going on too. So it's more of a risk for a wild animal to go into there versus going into a picnic area. So picnic areas, we tell people, are kind of the training grounds for wild bears to become nuisance bears too. That's a general statement, though. That's not always necessarily the case. It's a very, very general statement. So a bear don't wake up one day and say, "Hey, I'm a wild bear, but I'm going to go down to the middle of some town or something, and walk down and see what I can find to eat." They normally just don't do that unless they are starving to death and they're having some health issue. In that case, too, you can throw it out the window because they're going to do what they got to do to be able to try to find food and something to eat. So, at the early part of that progressive behavioral change, where these bears are out in the wild, just starting to go into a low risk developed area like a picnic area, these animals, it's very, very safe for them at that time. It's safe for people as well too. But when they start going into the daytime, the quality and the quantity of food improves. They get more, and obviously it's a more risky situation for the people, and it's also a more risky situation for bears. Excuse me, pardon my voice too. Daryl doesn't have all the pollen there. We've got a little bit here too. So anyway, is there any questions on that progressive behavioral change? Because that is very, very important. And I'll tell you why it's important. A lot of bear managers across North America have managed bears, but they've always waited till those bears become day active before they incorporated any aversive conditioning techniques. We're going to talk about that next. And so let me tell you what, in aversive conditioning, it's always better to start early. I've told people many times too, if you equate it to people, if you try to rehab a little boy or little girl stealing pencils when they're very, very young, the chances of you changing that behavior is probably pretty high. But if you allow that little boy or girl to grow up and continue that behavior and they start to rob banks, steal cars, things like that too, the chances of you changing that behavior is probably going to be pretty small too. And so that's typically how we try to manage bears is when they're in that early stage. I tell people the pencil stealing stages for people. So anyway, that's kind of a nutshell just of this how bears become uh, in this situation, how they become from a wild animal progress into a food condition or a more risky animal with an undesirable behavior too. So let's talk a little bit about aversive conditioning. Now, aversive conditioning, as I mentioned before, it's a use of an unpleasant task or activity to stop an unwanted behavior. So, not necessarily something that's going to be extremely harmful to the animal, but it will be very unpleasant. So, let me talk to you about a little thing. Let's say our tools in our toolbox. What do we have as bear managers that we can pull from to be able to manage bears that are nuisance animals or have unwanted behaviors? Your voice is one thing. Your voice commands too. Hey, bear, get back, bear. Wave your arms, body gestures, things like that too. That's one very initial type of aversive conditioning. Air horns, whistles, bear spray, other things you can try to move those animals away from you or away from a developed area. Bear managers also use pyrotechnics. They use things like, we call them screamers, bangers, and cracker shells. Screamers is it's very similar to bottle rockets, might equate it to bottle rockets. Bangers are it's pyrotechnics that shoot about 30 or 40 yards. Then you have a rapport from that; it explodes about 30 to 40 yards. Cracker shells have a much larger explosion. They'll travel about 100 yards. So if you're trying to move a bear away from a particular area, well, first of all, go up and say, "Hey, bear, get back, bear, get out here, bear." So you're trying to voice your command, because when you do that and you start stepping up your different techniques too, it may run away from you too, and then you might shoot a banger at it, and it goes off and it keeps on running, and then you might be able to deploy a cracker shell at about 100 yards. And then that bear comes back close to the road again. A lot of these people will say, hey, bear," because everybody start hollering bear, and that bear will remember that, and hopefully will move it away. Does that change its behavior? Probably not. I'm not sure that's going to necessarily be a permanent change on its behavior, but at least it's something we have in our toolbox to move these animals away. Dogs is another option. People have used Karelian bear dogs, Kerry Hunt. They actually have used those in some of the western parks too. I'm not sure those have a permanent change in a bear's behavior. It's just another tool in your toolbox to run those animals away from an area where they should not be. And something I worked on pretty extensively is a technique called capture and release on sight. It's very simple. We went into an area, we captured a bear, we took it down to a workup area, and we did a general biological workup. We didn't work. One of the maintenance guys thought we worked them over and not work them up. We did not work them over. He thought we beat them up and caused all kind of pain, which was not true at all. We pulled a non-functional tooth, like Daryl had described before, the first premolar, which is just behind the canine, and we actually sent that off for aging as well. So we pulled a tooth. We took a series of measurements. We may have tattooed the lip here with ink, tattoo ink, so we could keep up that animal if it lost its tags. Put ear tags in there. A series of measurements. And this is interesting. We took it back up to where we caught it, and we released it back in that area. So capture and release on sight. Now, we did that for the whole purpose of trying to evaluate that technique and see if we could keep bears, because in Chimney's picnic area in 88, 89, and 90, we removed over 32 bears out of one picnic area in a 3-year period. Now, that's a lot of bears. And we had a lady injured in there one year, one summer, and so we closed the site. I went back in there at nighttime and we surveyed the area to see how many bears were active, and there were 12 bears active in that picnic area at the same time. So what was happening, maintenance was coming in early in the morning. cleaning up all the garbage. The bears had rummaged all over this picnic area, and by the time people came there, it was clean as a whistle, and no one knew there was a problem. But we were basically conditioning all these animals to be a nuisance animal, and they sooner or later were going to become day active. We would catch it, we would move it out, and I'll be doggone if we didn't have another one come and take its place too. So 32 bears over a 3-year period. And one of the other techniques, of course, is relocation. We relocated those, and a lot of the bear managers do not use relocation very much. They say it does not work. And I can tell you it does work under certain situations too. You cannot allow a bear to stay in a developed area for a long period of time. If you do during the daytime, you move that bear, it will carry that nuisance behavior with it. However, if that animal just starts to lose his fear of people and starts to go from a night active period to a day active period, then you move that bear out in that early stages, you'll probably never see the animal again. So it does work. Now, one thing I want to make sure that I make it very clear on aversive conditioning. Really, all these things that I've mentioned before, if you did those different techniques during the daytime, you probably would not have bears that change their behavior on a permanent basis. However, if you took those same animals and did all those things to them at nighttime, that actually results in a more lasting change in the behavior. So nighttime is when you can make an impression on a bear's behavior. If you do the same thing to that same animal that has progressed into a day active situation, then your chances of changing the behavior are very, very small too. There's obviously, it's a general statement, doesn't always work. Dr. Jay Clark did a project where on his master's where we went in and used this very technique in Chimney's picnic area. We caught bears that were night active. We radio called them, released them, and lo and behold, those animals stayed in the general area, but they did not go back into Chimney's picnic area. No one saw them after that until there was a food failure. And when there was a food failure, those bears remembered where they got food from. So they went back to Chimney's picnic area. It could be 4 or 5 or 6 years later before they had a food failure. So they remembered that thing. And one thing I might mention too, remember Dr. Michael Pelton always said if you equate intelligence to size of brain, that primates are number 1, bears are number 2, and pigs are number 3. So bears are pretty intelligent creatures for sure. And they can remember things that happened a long time ago. So just keep in mind about that night active versus day active situation too. And somebody said, well, at night active, they're not a problem. That's exactly right. They're not a problem at nighttime because typically people are not going to be there unless it's a campground. However, that's the time you can make an impression on behavior. So we monitor these developed areas at nighttime, primarily the picnic areas, which are the lower risk areas. And any bears are active in there at nighttime, we would set a trap, a culvert trap, which is a piece of culvert about 7 feet long, have some bait inside of that, either fried bacon or sardines, or our secret weapon was hot Krispy Kreme donuts, and it normally would work, and we would catch a bear in there. So we'd catch that bear, we would do a general biological workup, take it right back up the next day, and release it. So we start changing around. So we moved 32 bears out in 3 years, and after we started using and incorporate that technique with night active bears too, it pushed it down where there's only a few bears moved out of that picnic area over the next 10 or 12 years too. So it worked really, really good. It's not a cure-all, but it is a technique that under certain situations too, if you can deal with these animals when they're not active, then you're going to see some good results as well. So that's kind of the tools in our toolbox that we talked about with capture and release, dogs, pyrotechnics, air horns, bear spray, or voice commands, and relocation. Obviously, euthanasia is another technique, obviously, and it's a permanent technique to be able to deal with certain animals. And sometimes we have to do that. Okay.
Kim, can I jump in and ask you a question and to elaborate more on it? One of the things that you hear from the public all the time, whenever a bear situation begins to arise, it seems like immediately everyone goes to the capture and move it somewhere or relocate it. And you mentioned about the problem is if you have a bear that is exhibiting some of the day active behavior, and it's a big time problem bear, you don't want to take it from one place and create a problem in another place. But I think we could elaborate more on it. Is it's not good for the bears because when you take a bear, especially if it's a younger bear, and say he is fairly well behaved, if you take him to a brand new territory and release him right smack dab in the middle of a highly dense uh, bear population or where there's a lot of other bears, it's oftentimes very difficult for that bear to survive. So it's not just an issue of creating a nuisance problem in another location. Sometimes those relocated animals don't do so well because they're in a foreign territory. They might get their butt kicked by the resident bears there, and so whenever people always jump to that, why don't you just relocate the animal? It's for a number of reasons we don't do that. It's not just bad for the people that get the bear dumped on them, but it's also oftentimes bad for the bear itself.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. What went through my head, let's say, for example, we're working on these bears at nighttime, trying to change their behavior and not allow them to become day active, but we lose on something. We try to sanitize the area as much as we can before dark. We had maintenance to come in and start working an evening schedule to pick up all the scraps, the watermelon rinds, things like that, clean out all the barbecue grills and try to sanitize the area as much as possible. And it was a battle the first few years because people were not seeing as many bears in Shimmy's picnic area. We even had people that actually went up there and started hiding food, trying to lure bears in because they knew that what we were doing was trying to clean everything back up. So it was a battle to say the least. So yeah, relocation for us, if it's used in the right way, when a bear is just starting to lose its fear of people and become day active. And once you can actually try capture and release on that animal during the daytime, and it typically will not work. You do it at nighttime, and it has generally worked very, very well. But if you try everything that you can, that bear becomes day active, starts to become day active, then we pick him up and move him at least 40 air miles from the capture site. And typically that's going to be outside the boundaries of Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And we've had really good success by doing that. However, I've told the organizations like Tennessee Wildlife Resource Agency that Darrell worked, and also the Forest Service, that any bears that cause problem of where we move the animal to, we would come and deal with that. And I think we had to do that over many, many years. Probably 2 or 3 animals is the only ones we had to deal with. My computer went out there for a second. Anyway, so that's just kind of in a nutshell what went through my head here. I've got some scenarios that I want you guys to be the bear manager here. So,
Tim. Trish asked a question. Is there any understanding as to why the bears respond better to relocation when it happens at night?
yes, because their behavior is not already, they still have some fear of people there when you move them. If you wait and let them become day active to where they walk around people, chasing people, running people off of tables, where they have absolutely no fear of people to, if you move that animal somewhere else to, you increase the likelihood it will carry that nuisance behavior with it. But if it just starts losing its fear of people and starting to become active at dusk, I'll tell you what they do at dusk. When they first start showing up in the daytime, they'll go around the perimeter of the picnic area looking for tables that basically are unattended, that have food on them. So they will go up and get food from those when no people are there. If you let that continue, they will run people off of tables that are sitting at a table, and the behavior gets worse and worse from that point. So it's only for those animals that's just now starting to lose that that fear of people and become day active. Those are the animals we move. If they're very aggressive, if they went into tents, things like that, into cars, no, we typically will not move those animals anywhere else because they could carry that behavior with them. So I hope that answers your questions. Okay, one thing I want to let you guys hear, I want you guys to be the bear manager, and I'm going to give you a scenario, and you tell me what you would do if you had the option of managing that bear. So let me give you some management options here. One, you do nothing, just kind of ignore the bear's behavior and kind of let nature take its course. So one would be do nothing. Two, you might post warning signs. Three, you might close the campground or the site, trail, whatever it might be. You might use aversive conditioning. You might relocate it, or you might kill it. So let's say, for example, here, let me give you let me look at one right here. We won't have time to do all of these too. But let's say, for example, that a bear is continuously feeding on blueberries right beside a trail. So that bear is there throughout the entire day feeding on blueberries, and it's right on a very heavily used trail. What would you guys do, or what would you suggest that we would do to manage that bear and people properly? Any questions out there, or any possible options out there? Post warning signs, Jenny. That's exactly right. Absolutely, we'll do that too. And a lot of times that's what we'll do. Depends on how close it is. It depends on how that bear reacts to people. Sometimes those bears will ignore people. Like I said, they will tolerate people to take advantage of that high quality food source. So they'll ignore people. Other bears, if they're on a carcass or something, they might be very defensive towards people. And every time they walk by, there's some kind of response to that bear too. So, yep, that's what we would do. We would post warning signs. We would continue monitoring. And if that bear basically got more aggressive towards people, then we may have to close that site, that trail entirely. So that's a good one. All right, let's talk to about another one here. What about a bear that was just seen? You got a report of a bear that was seen in a backcountry campsite. Report of a bear that was seen in the backcountry campsite. What would you do? Do nothing, post warning signs, close the site, aversive conditioning, relocation, or euthanasia. And it may be a combination of things. It may be more than just one thing. Trish, nothing. Yep. It's seen there too. Could be just a pass through. Let me ask you this. What kind of information do you think you might need if you get a report of a bear that passed through a campsite? What's one thing that you might do to be able to make sure you're doing the right thing as far as a management technique is concerned? I tell you what I would want to do. I would want to make sure that that's just the first time, and that bear has not been up there for 2 or 3 weeks, and it's just not been reported. So it's very, very important that you send someone up there to try to gather more information from people that are there to see if this is something that's recurring several times or if it's just a first-time deal. So trying to get a better picture of what's going on. Find out what's attracting the bear. A good idea. That's exactly right. We've had some people actually in the park, and we talk about this in our shelters because we are one of the few places on the Appalachian Trail that had enclosed shelters, and so we had chain link fence covering on the first of it, so these people could go inside the shelter, close the door, and then camp inside there and sleep. Well, what that was doing, we were catering to slob campers. They would go in there, close the door, and they'd throw food out the chain link fence and start feeding and food conditioning bears, and we had more problems in that situation. So I went to the chief ranger and asked if we could do a demonstration by removing the chain link fence off of the shelter. We did that, and what happened, those people who were kind of slob campers, they did not go up there again because they were afraid. And the people that were there actually were much, much cleaner, and they would not allow other people to actually cook inside their area where they were going to sleep. So it changed the people's behavior. Not only did it the bear behavior. We took a little chance. I'll agree that some of those animals that were aggressive, we may not take the chain link fence off because those animals could cause some problems for people if we remove the chain link fence. But if we didn't have a dangerous bear, a very aggressive bear, we took it off. It changed the whole dynamics of the people that were there, and all of the chain link fence, I think, has been removed off all the shelters in Great Smoky Mountains National Park too. So anyway, so let me give you another scenario here. A bear that rips up tents, went into a backcountry campsite, and he ripped up several tents, but there were no people in the campsite when this happened. Okay, y'all put your thinking caps on. Bear goes in and rips up tents at a campsite, backcountry campsite. So what might you do to mitigate that problem? Any options out there? You know what? Just take a stab at it, because I'm telling you, a lot of people have no clue. Close the campsite. Capture and move. Okay. All right. Let me give you that. Let's address those right there. You capture this bear and move it. Sometimes these campsites are 5, 6, 7 miles away with no vehicular access to. That makes a problem, obviously. So let's say, for example, I'm going to call the state or the Forest Service and say, hey, I've got a bear that ripped up some tents. Could I move that bear on your all's property? And what do you think their answer is going to be? I can tell you what it'll be. They're going to say no, and it's going to be absolutely no. No, you're not going to do that, and I understand that. So we have to deal with that too. If a bear rips up a tent, let me tell you one thing that we had kind of an unwritten policy in the park. Let me tell you why the policy on euthanizing bears. Typically, if a bear went into a tent, he went into a car, it tore into some kind of a structure or was extremely aggressive, and I know that's a very subjective term, that we would probably recommend to the superintendent to euthanize that bear. Let me tell you why. It's not just to keep that site open for the general public. It's also on the bear side too. It's really to protect the integrity of the entire bear population. So Yosemite National Park, they have a whole culture of bears that rip into cars for food, to find food. That does not happen in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and their bear population is only a fraction of what we have in Great Smoky Mountains. So why is a car in the Smokies a safe place to store your food, but it's not a safe place to store your food in Yosemite? Any answers on that? Anybody like to take a stab at that? Why is a car safe to store your food in the Smokies, but it's not in Yosemite National Park? Anybody have any guesses on that? Learned behavior, absolutely correct. Yeah, thank you, Jenny. So let's say, for example, at one time there may have been no bears in Yosemite National Park that broke windows out, and then one started to do that. Someone may have left their window down, and this animal popped the window out, got inside of it. That behavior progressed. They busted windows out. They trained and learned. They trained their cubs to do the same thing. And if you don't deal with that undesirable behavior, pretty soon you'll have the whole population do it, and that's what starts to happen in Yosemite National Park. Well, in the Smokies, if that happens with a population of 1,500 or 1,600 bears, if we allow that negative behavior to pass through the whole population, we would be in trouble. I can promise you that. So when we euthanize a bear, the whole point is that we're not just trying to protect the people, but we're also trying to protect the integrity of our bear population, to maintain these animals in a wild behavior, in a wild state, so that they live much, much longer and more productive lives too. And I hope that makes sense to everybody too. We didn't typically kill a large number of bears. When I was there, we killed probably 1 or 2 bears every year, but it was not. And I had one case where I elected not to put a bear down. It was a bear that was on our video, one of our park films, and I felt like it was entrapment. Someone left food in the back of their car. The window was halfway down, and she popped the window out, went inside, tore the vehicle up, and I felt like it was entrapment. So the guy that worked for me, he said, "You gonna recommend we put her down?" I said, "No, I'm not going to do that, because that's not fair. That's entrapment." So we moved that bear to Johnson County, and she moved over to North Carolina, went into a guy's house that was watching TV, walked between the TV and him on the couch, went into the kitchen, actually tore into the refrigerator and ate a bunch of food there too. And so they called me and said, "Hey, we caught your bear. Will you come pick it up?" And I said, "Absolutely, I will." And so in that case right there, I violated what I thought was the right thing to do, because I felt like that was entrapment too, and that bear could have hurt that guy when his house. So that's from that point on, we try to stay true to that. So it doesn't happen to a lot of bears. People, we manage people the same way. People with bad behaviors, we deal with them pretty seriously. Sometimes we put them away, or even worse in some situations, well too. So anyway, that's we probably would elect to. I would probably elect if a bear ripped up tents. That behavior will repeat because they've gotten food from tents before, and they're probably going to do it again. And so that's
Kim,
kind of what I would do.
before we move on, there's a comment
Yep.
that I think we need to address, and I'm not calling Lori out on it, but when you posed the scenario of the bear getting into the tents, one thing that Lori wrote, which I think we need to talk about, she said, spray the tents with bear repellent.
Okay. All right. Well, that's interesting. Well, bear repellent, is organic. And so we tell people if you want to use bear spray to deter a bear that's charging you, that's in the process of getting very close to you, that's fine. It's organic, though. If you spray bear spray on your tent or your campsite too, it will serve as an attractant. So if you spray bear spray on a log or a tree or something too, put a camera on it, you will have bears and deer and other animals come by and even lick that bear spray because it's organic. It doesn't serve the same way it would if you spray it into its eyes. So I understand that. Let's see. Daryl, did that answer what she was talking about?
You answered it exactly how I was hoping. When a bear is charging at you, that is what that bear spray is designed. It's designed to stop a charge. But it is not meant like mosquito repellent where you spray it all over, because it actually, once it dries, it actually attracts bears, or has the potential to attract bears. So whatever you do, don't spray bear spray all over your tents, because in a little while you might be luring bears to your tent instead of keeping them away. I do want to address one. Lori commented. She said, I'm learning that this is a whole different mindset between working for the welfare of an individual bear, like at ABR, and working for the welfare of an entire population. And I think that is such a very valid point. And I'm talking about that all the time. I was the manager of both. When I was at the Bear Center, and I was caring for individual bears. Kim dealt with a lot of individual bears. But I was also, at one point in my career, managing bear populations. And when you have to think about the bear population as a whole. And just like Kim said, oftentimes there might be an animal that has to be taken out, and I've never met a wildlife biologist that enjoyed that part of the job. It's the worst part of the job, because you're working for these animals and you never want to have to do that. But you have to think holistically. Is the removal of a bear going to be a good move for the entire bear population? I think that was such a fantastic example that Kim talked about with Yosemite. Is it just started with a couple of bears that eventually that whole population became accustomed to breaking into cars. And so if that situation was nipped in the bud earlier, you would have a much healthier, more wild bear population if those behaviors weren't encouraged and allowed to proliferate within that population. So it's a tough thing. You've got to separate yourself, because I will tell you, individual animals, I feel for them, but I'm also trying to think in the bigger picture, the bigger scale, and do things that's best for the population as a whole. Because heck, if I could save one bear, that's great. But if I could save 5,000 bears, that's even better.
Yeah. One thing I might mention, Daryl, too, in the case of Appalachian Bear Rescue, too, they're rehabbing. Those animals that they release, have wild behavior when they go in there. If they don't, the chances of release may not be good, or they may not be able to take them. So they bring in bears with wild behaviors, and they maintain that wild behavior. They rehab the animal, whether it's in poor condition or it's injured or whatever it might be, we can release it back in the wild. But if that's already a food condition animal, but when it goes in there, I think it's probably dealt with a little bit differently than what typically happens. Let me tell you, it is so complicated. There's so many things go through your head when you're managing individual animals too, and every scenario is so different. For example, a provoked or an unprovoked attack. So we say, well, if it attacks somebody, we need to put it down. Let me tell you a story. On the one area of the cove, there was a sow with some cubs. All the people were doing the right thing, standing on the roadway, taking pictures, videos, things like that, except one guy from, I don't think anybody here is from Alabama. But anyway, this guy was from Alabama, and he went up behind the bears, kind of was sneaking in behind them, come down and actually come over a log and surprised them all. Cubs went every direction, scared the mother, and the mother took off after the guy. It was a surprise to him as well. He said he remembered running as hard as he could run, and something actually hit him from behind, knocked him down into a tree that had the protruding, sharp limbs, and one of them hit a home run, hit him right in his private parts, and did some pretty serious damage. He had to go to the hospital, get sewn up too. And so most people say, "Oh, that bear attacked that guy," so the park will put him down. And so one of the staff come and asked me if we were going to catch that bear and put it down. I said, "Well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're not going. We are going to catch it, but we're going to put it in a captive breeding program, and we're going to breed more bears just like her and release them all over the park because there couldn't be a better bear out there for protecting her cubs that actually pushed a guy and hit a guy and knocked him away from it, but didn't bite him or scratch him." So that was a provoked attack, and we did not put that animal down. So bear management is a moving target. There's so many different situations on behaviors, on what people do, what the bears do, what the history is, things you can control, things you cannot control, that it's extremely hard. And after you do it for 32 years, you'll be ready to retire. I can promise you that. Any more questions, Daryl?
I looked at everything. I think we've got everything answered so far. Wait, Lori's typing something.
Okay. Well, I might while she's doing that, I might throw in another situation here too with a bear that is reported following some people on the trail, and that's we've had bears follow people. We've had bears that actually would lay on the side of the trail hiding, and then would jump out and chase people down the trail, and people would throw their food down, and that bear would get their food. And we've even had a bear that climbed up in a tree, stood up and hung up in a tree, and would jump on people's backpacks as they passed on Rainbow Falls Trail. So in a situation like that, I mean, you don't have a lot of options too. A bear would be that bold and that aggressive too. Probably that's not a bear that anybody's going to take if you relocate it. And it's probably not going to be a behavior that you can change. That's right, Laurie. Yeah, that's exactly right on Star Trek. Yeah, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one too. And I'll tell you, in the case of bear attacks and stuff too, I mean, all the stars have to line up just perfectly for that animal. The person has to act in a way that the animal is willing to take a chance and go after them. The bear has to be in a condition to where it's willing to give up. It's a very risky situation to go after someone as well. So all the things have to line up just exactly right before a bear ever goes towards someone. Now, most of the bears that approach people in the Smokies, they're approaching them to get their food. It's not they're approaching them to prey on them. When bears stand up on their hind feet, that's really what they're trying to do. They're trying to size someone up. They're trying to evaluate them. Many bears that follow people on trails, not sure I know their motive. I think they're after your food, but some of them may be evaluating you on how you respond. So typically, a bear that attacks someone is going to be the general feeling is that bears with predatory behavior, they typically go after the smallest person first. Typically, it happens in the spring or the fall of the year. It's normally a male bear. The persistence of the attack, there's typically no history of that animal before, and there's actually no human food. It's not a garbage bear typically in that situation. So we've got some good things that helps us to understand whether it's predatory attack or not. But just bear management in general on these animals, it is so complicated that you have to spend a lot of time evaluating the situation too. I'll tell you what we would do if we had a bear active in a campsite too and hadn't had any bears tear tents down or get food from people. we would close that campsite for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks too. And then before we reopened it, we would put tents in there uh, to simulate a camping experience. Put food up on the food storage cables, and then we put a camera in there, and we would monitor that site and until no bears were active in that campsite, and then we'd reopen it. So we looked at how we could lessen the impact or lessen the chance that any bears would be active in that area too. So the problem with bear management is you never get the whole story. You may get the story 3 or 4 or 5 days down the road. You never got those first 2 or 3 or 4 days of information, which is very critical to help you to decide what management option you're going to choose for that particular animal. And I've had people tell me, well, why don't you just move them way back? Well, you know what? There's really not a way back here in the East. The park is a little over 500,000 acres, and those bears can walk from one side outside the park all the way to the other side in a day. Some recent research in the Smokies with the GPS collars showed how that just about all these bears that they had collared at one time or the other moved outside the park. And so they're very smart. They know how to get food, and they're going to get food the easy way they can. If they can find garbage or unsecured garbage from garbage non-secure garbage cans, then they're going to go after they're after that too. And then once they learn that, it's pretty hard to shake. Oh, if you had found Hartley Bear, would he be at ABR today? Daryl, do you want to answer that? Hartley Bear.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. I adjusted my microphone because we were getting a little feedback. I think absolutely. Now, I will tell you that I was a stickler with when I was at ABR. I felt, and this was my belief, and Kim might share it too. We were there to help bears, particularly if the orphaning was the result of some type of human action. So you have a mother that gets hit by a car, or um, a human causes a situation where that orphan cub becomes, or the human causes the cub to be orphaned. That was what we were there for. And now you have to understand, when we started that bear center in the 90s, the bear populations were nowhere near what they are today. They're unbelievably large today. So there was a feeling like every single bear we saved was a really good thing. I don't want to say that the bear center's not useful in that, because the bear population is exploding. But it definitely was an awesome um, experience to help these bears, especially when we were the cause, or man was the cause of them becoming orphaned. Now, I will tell you, there were some situations where um, cubs. I'll give you an example. Last year in Great Smoky Mountain National Park, there was a situation where a cub ventured too close to um, another adult bear as an adult male that was not um, part of that cub's family, and that cub did not survive. And there was just tremendous public outcry about why didn't the rangers do something? The park should have stepped in to save that cub. And I don't think at all we should ever interfere with how Mother Nature operates. It's oftentimes cruel, but that's how these animals learn and evolve. It's the survival of the fittest. Now, this bear from Kentucky that they mentioned, this Hartley bear, we don't know, or nobody knows why that bear was like that. But Kim, are you familiar with it? Have you seen it? It is the most pitiful, sad, coolest looking cub I've ever
Yeah.
seen, because it's missing quite a bit of facial hair, and it's missing some hair on it, a couple of its limbs. But it's so pathetic looking that it is just you can't help but be touched by this bear. And the reason I think that is such an awesome bear for the Bear Center to take in and rehabilitate, it raises awareness. It can't help but pull on heartstrings when people see this and they see the good work that the ABR does, and the fact that they're working with other state agencies, the fact that they're working with the federal agencies. It's just really good public relations. And so I'm thrilled that they got the cubs that they have, and now they also had those neonatals from Louisiana. So there might be a situation or two where the orphaning may not have been caused by humans, but um, I think they're doing great work, and I think it's a fantastic thing that they're doing with Hartley.
I tell you what the way I think in
Kim, are
that
you still
terms is
there?
that I kind of I feel like that. Yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear
Yes.
me? Uh, Daryl, I can hear you fine. Let's see here.
We could hear you.
Let me look here. Can you hear
Yes.
me okay now? Uh, let's see. Yeah, you're good. Yeah, Trish said she can hear me. Okay. Uh, Daryl, can you hear
Yes.
me okay? Apparently Daryl can't hear me. Okay. All right. Good. The way I look at it, is that basically uh, bear populations basically have been impacted. Bear habitats have been impacted by roads, by parking lots, by hotels, motels, developed areas too, and we have greatly impacted their population as well. And so I think that what's important to me is that we do manage these animals on an individual basis, especially because development has impacted them, and I think it's the right thing to do to try to help these individual animals if they're orphaned or they're injured or they're hurt in some way. Especially it's just the right thing to do, and I think that you do gain credibility by to be able to address those animals on an individual basis too. You can't save them all, but I think animal welfare is very important for us
Hey, Kim, can you hear
to
me
try to
now?
address the ones that we can.
Okay. Lori
I sure
mentioned
can.
something that
Yes.
I touch on quite a bit whenever I give a lot of my wildlife talks, and it deals with subspecies because sometimes we go overboard with designating subspecies. And Lori mentioned the two neonatal cubs that the Bear Center just received from Louisiana. Those are designated as Louisiana black bear subspecies. And at one point they were listed as endangered. I think they have been delisted. But what is your thought on that with them being Louisiana black bear subspecies? Yes.
Me? Yeah. Well, let me tell you what I think I think the Florida black bear and the Louisiana black bear were threatened. I don't think they were endangered unless I'm incorrect. Uh, Actually, I talked to the lady that actually was part of that too, and that situation as well too. And so there was a lot of people who did not feel that those bears should have been listed as threatened. They felt the population was to a level where it should, and so there's a disagreement right off the bat too. But they were listed. The population's rebound, of course, and I think there was a lady that was attacked and injured in Florida, and they had enough bears where they felt like the status should be changed back to non-threatening or not endangered as well too. So anyway, I'm not. You know, are you a lumper or a splitter genetically too? Well, I'm more of a lumper than I am a splitter. Excuse me. So, but some people, I think animals are a reflection of their
And I
habitat
agree with
more
you
than maybe
wholeheartedly.
they
And
are
Lori,
genetically.
one thing that you could think of, say say things went horribly wrong in Louisiana. There was also the Florida subspecies too. But say black bear, the Florida black bear or Louisiana black bear, there was just a tremendous flood, wiped them all out. We could just take bears from Tennessee or wherever and put them there. It's still the same species, and so it's definitely that question of are you a lumper or a splitter because uh, black bears have never been to the point where they were threatened or endangered. But these little individual subspecies, which are primarily just geographic pockets, um, yeah, you could go either way on that. But it's neat that Louisiana contacted the Bear Center to see if they would rehab these cubs. And Lori asked a question about the elk. The elk going back in the park, those were not the subspecies that were originally native. to Tennessee.
That's correct. Yeah, of course, the eastern elk subspecies is what we had before, and of course, we felt like that species was extirpated too, and so uh, uh, I'm trying to think. Well, there's 7 different subspecies, I think, as well too. Uh, I'm trying to think what species. I just went blank on what subspecies we had. The uh, not the Merriman, not the Roosevelt,
Rocky
not the Thule.
Rocky
Uh,
Mountain elk.
there was.
Rocky Mountain
I'm
elk.
sorry. No, not
There's
no, not the
Manitoba.
Rocky
There's
Mountain
Manitoban.
elk. I'm sorry. I could it slipped my mind. Manitoban species came out of Canada, Alberta, went down along the Mississippi River. Basically, it was on the west side of the Mississippi, so it was right across the river from where the original uh, range was for the eastern elk too. And so that was really the next closest subspecies, but it was a subspecies that was available for us to be able to move from Elk Island National Park down to North Carolina and Tennessee. So I don't think, like I said before, I think uh, animals are a reflection of their habitat, not necessarily a big change in genetics. So
Me
I'm
too.
a lumper.
Well, I just want to let you know we're already. It's crazy how fast time flies, but we're already 90 minutes into this, and so Kim, do you have any like final things you want to talk about, or any other last questions from the audience?
Not really. I think someone earlier had said something. If maybe wonder if we wondered if this. A lot of people thought this class was about hunting, about bear hunting. So, and I don't know the answer to that at all. I really don't have any idea. I just felt like that we need to. People have a question of why we move certain bears, why we put some bears down, why we don't do nothing on other bears too. And so, I think the whole point of having this class was let people understand kind of what goes through a bear manager's mind and how we come up with recommendations on what we should do with certain bears under
Well,
certain
I
scenarios.
think when that was originally posed, I think it was a comment made by why there wasn't as many people in this class as there was in your last class, and I think Kelly wanted to know she was wondering maybe it was people thought it was we were going to be talking about hunting quite a bit. And I think the true and honest answer to why we don't have as many people is I've been so busy I haven't advertised this class as much as I should have, and that's my fault. But you guys are awesome for hopping in here. What I'm gonna do, I want to tell you about something coming up here, and so obviously we give photo credits. That's probably more people than we had pictures, but you all have been through these talks before. You know exactly how to get information about upcoming classes. Go to Wildlife for You either on Facebook or Twitter, or you could visit us on the web at wildlifeforyou.com to look at some upcoming classes. But mark your calendars. I'm really excited. There's only like, I swear, there's only like 5 people in the whole world that know about this right now. One of the things that we are going to do is many of you know about this swap program we do where we take these wildlife students from one part of the country across the country to let them experience different things. And we're doing a fundraiser coming up here in April, and this is going to be really cool. This is it. It's separate from Wildlife for You. This is to raise money for that Student Wildlands Adventure program. And what I did is I brought together a pretty powerful bear panel that we're going to spend an evening. It's going to be a Sunday evening, April 14th. We're going to start at 7:30 p.m. We had a couple of conflicts with some of the people, but what we're doing is we're going to have at least 4, possibly 5 bear experts from all over North America. It's going to include Kim Delosier, who obviously is on this talk, but we're also bringing in Coy Blair, who is the curator from the Appalachian Bear Rescue. If something comes up and he can't do it, then either David or Janet will step in. But we're going to have one of them from the Bear Rescue join us. Then one of my coworkers out here in the West, Dr. Carl Malcolm, he did his doctorate on bears. He actually was studying bears in China for a while. Super personable and intelligent. He blows me away with brain power alone. I'll serve on that. Then Robert Brewer, many of you know Robert Brewer for being a part of the SWAP program. He's going to be the moderator. And so literally what we plan on doing this evening, we want to invite all of you to join us. It's a fundraiser for SWAP, so we're going to hope to get like a $20 donation to join in, but we're going to spend probably a couple hours. We're going to start off, we're going to tell a bear story or two from each one of us, but then we're going to spend the whole evening just answering your questions. We'll probably ask for questions beforehand so we make sure we got a good list to keep us moving, but we're literally just going to sit around a campfire and talk about black bears for a couple hours and hopefully raise quite a bit of money to send these kids from Tennessee to New Mexico this year. So I think that'll be a fantastic thing. I'm going to start advertising now. But I thank everyone for joining us tonight. If you have any other last questions or comments, by all means, type it in. I got to read in the chat box, so Kim, if you want to respond to something.
Sure. I just want to say I appreciate the time with everybody too. Being a bear manager was pretty stressful at times too. I found out one thing: you can't make everybody happy at all, and I know some people. There was like no situation where it warranted to euthanize a bear too. Even the case, well, Elora Petrosekal, a six-year-old girl that was killed by a bear. Some people just couldn't believe that the bear would do that, and they felt like that we should not have put those animals down. And so anyway, so you really can't win. You just do the best job you can, and hopefully be able to sleep well at nighttime. But I've enjoyed it, Daryl.
Okay, I was responding to Lori asked if it was $20 per question. No, it's $20 just to get you to the campfire. You could ask as many questions as you'd like, but I'm pretty excited and happy that all those folks volunteered to help us raise money for these students. We've got an amazing adventure plan for them. So third week of July, we're hoping to bring about 15 to 20 students, wildlife students from all over Tennessee. It's not just that Cleveland State. It's going to be open to students from University of Tennessee, Knoxville, all over the state, and bring them out west and show them some of the places where Aldo Leopold kind of developed his line of thinking. And if you don't know Aldo Leopold, just phenomenal. He's the father of wildlife conservation. Phenomenal person, phenomenal writer. His books are just absolutely fantastic. So with that, I think, like I said, the time flies so incredibly fast. I want to thank you one last time. You guys were awesome. And thank you, Kim, for joining us and being one of our bear experts here.
Sure. Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Well, we're signing off. I'm going to go grab something to eat, and we'll see you next time. Bye, guys.
Take care.